Hello and welcome to another episode of Disaster Empire Quick Views, where we work to spotlight innovators, thought leaders in the resilience space. And so I am Ashley Guzman. I'm really excited to have with me today Katie Belfi, and she is doing some amazing work in her space in resilience. And I don't want to take her thunder, so I'm going to let her jump in and give all the specifics on that. But as we do, first I want to have her give a little review for all of our audience out there so that you have a bit of an understanding of her background and her lens where she's coming from into the consulting work. So take it away, Katie, and welcome. Thank you.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here. So a bit about where I came from and how I got here. It's been a really interesting path that I never could have imagined. I started out my career as an attorney. I was a commercial litigator.
Okay.
I did that for a few years and decided, as a young attorney does, that I wanted to be doing something that felt more like helping people. So I joined FEMA as regional counsel in Region 2.
Nice.
And as luck would have it, I joined right before Hurricane Sandy. So to say it was baptism by fire is a major understatement. But it ended up being truly like an amazing introduction to emergency management. I got an up close and personal look at disaster management right off the bat. And I spent a few years working in New York on the Sandy response and then transitioned back to sort of normal operations, at which point I decided my clients' jobs were way more interesting than mine. So took off my lawyer hat, became a full-fledged emergency manager, and started working for NYU Langone in their enterprise resilience and emergency management department. And that was also fantastic experience. Working with a new team, sort of building the program from soup to nuts after Sandy, allowed me to get a better understanding of what it looked like on the private side, having started out at FEMA. Yeah. And so I eventually took all of that information and all that experience and wrapped it into a consulting business of my own that I took out on the road thinking that I would mostly be working with corporations, but it's sort of been corporations, communities, territories, colleges. And the one constant that I realized in working with all of these different types of entities is that all of the work we did on institutional resilience didn't mean a thing if we weren't also talking about the resilience of their people. And, it started with one or two organizations that had that like quintessential person. Like we, as emergency managers, we are often this person wherever we are in our organizations. It's like the person who is good under pressure, the person who is thinking strategically and planning 4 or 5 steps ahead, the person who's a great communicator, who's thinking about logistics. So, and what I kept realizing was that so many organizations had these 1 or 2 or 3 people that they would try to plug into all of these critical positions. Yeah. And it was much more than who's trained in emergency management. It was really these core personal characteristics that I believe we can develop, but that nobody was really implementing on an institutional basis. So that's what sort of gave rise to what I'm doing today. That was a very long-winded way of telling you this, but it's I haven't figured out an elevator pitch for explaining how I got here because it's a crazy journey.
And you'll find it. And we missed each other in New York by just a couple of years because I was down there in 2003, 2004 after September 11th. So yeah. And then for Katrina, I was here in my backyard on Cape Cod, amazingly, and I wasn't living here at the time as I do now, but I did grow up here. So it was amazing to be doing, a FEMA and state-led recovery operation, welcoming guests from Louisiana. So I know that you'll have a ton of stories to share about your experience really supporting FEMA at that time, and definitely was a watershed event for FEMA and for state agencies, for all of us out there post-Katrina. So, hey, before we dive in, do you want to share a fun fact for those who know you or don't know you and want to get to know you better?
Absolutely.
Great.
I love a fun fact icebreaker. I love to share this one about me because I think it's really sort of illuminating about who I became as an adult. But when I was 3 years old, I was the youngest of 4 children. I would not leave my mother alone until she bought me a fire escape ladder for my room.
Okay.
I was planning from
shades
that
of things to come. Definitely.
And the poor thing, like, she finally gave in and like bought me this ladder, and she's like, okay, like, leave me alone now, kid, you know? And I was like, nope, we need to do a drill because I need to know how to use it.
Wow.
This is like a true story. People are like, you're making this up. And I'm like, no, this is who I've always been.
That's
so at
great.
least I know that I'm on the right path.
You are. You're definitely in the right profession. So, hey, with that, really getting to know your background a bit, and you shared a bit also about your journey. But with that, what are you offering today to your clients and in the resilience space that you think makes unique, or like you were saying, you know, would add value to the clients that you work with?
Well, I'm really in the process of trying to build a holistic resilience offering for organizations. And that means not just institutional resilience, but also looking at what it means to be cultivating individual resilience for your employees. And so from my perspective, that's a cultural shift. You know, I use the analogy that you can't grow roses by sprinkling some soil on concrete. You know, you need to change the environment that you're asking these plants to grow in. And so it starts with the way we would do sort of a risk assessment for your institutional resilience. We do the same on the individual side and really key into the things that might be hampering the individual's ability to cultivate resilience at work based on the culture that exists and identify ways that we can change that. So, for example, if you want to cultivate resilience among your employees and you expect to build a staff that's in a position to be ready and committed and able to adjust to change or respond to a disaster, you need to be cultivating an energy among that group where people feel like they can raise issues when they see them, where they feel inspired to solve problems and offer up their solutions, whether or not it's something that might be directly in their line of responsibility. You know, you have to be cultivating that type of environment and the communication structure around it from the get-go. And it's not just on the employee level. That has to go all the way up and all the way down. You know, managers need to be trained to know how to sort of inspire that kind of engagement and empower employees that way. But at the very top, the core values of any organization need to be aligned with that kind of outcome.
Absolutely. And this is why I wanted to talk to you, because I really loved how you were putting forward the importance of the holistic view, looking at the individual person all the way through the organization. And I'm assuming, you know, you're parlaying that to the community as well, that all parts, right, of our communities and our companies really need to be resilient. And that starts with individuals, you know, feeling like they're able to bounce back and they have the support they need when events occur so that they can do their job ultimately, or, you know, are able to support the organization to the best of their ability. So thank you so much for that. Can we dive a little bit deeper into, and you use that word holistic resilience, but what does resilience mean to you? How do you define it?
I love this question so much, Ashley, because I think it's a word that has become so overused that we've sort of lost a definition that everybody accepts. I really think it's become a bit squishy. And the thing that I've noticed in the squishiness that like kind of makes my skin crawl is how it has seeped over into the world of like grit and mental toughness.
Love those terms.
And while those terms have their place, and those are both very important characteristics, I think they're deserving of their own term for a reason, because the quality about resilience that I like to really highlight for people is that resilience implies that there has been an impact, right? It's our ability to bounce back, to return to either the shape that we were before impact, or perhaps even better than we were before. But if we're impervious and we tell ourselves that it's this like bulletproof nature that is resilience, we're denying people the opportunity to really learn from that impact, because we're telling them it should never have happened in the first place. And so for me, resilience is really the present state of existence that's informed by that impact. It's informed by that past. And it's also contemplating the future. It's, we use what we've learned to figure out where we want to go. But the most critical part of that definition is that it is in the present moment. We're neither hanging out in our past and reliving our regrets, nor are we tripping ahead to what we hope to achieve down the road. We're allowing both of those things to inform our current state.
That's a great explanation. And I was hearing a lot about the dynamic sense of a person, right? That people aren't in fixed states, and it adjusts and it changes over time. And I think with resilience, we're looking to really strengthen people so that they're not falling down, or so that they can pick themselves up after an event happens. And I think we're trying to do the same with businesses and organizations, right?
That's right.
It's the same way, we want them to thrive and we want them to survive. So really like what you hit on there and the way that you were explaining that. I did want to ask you about, some of your background, and then moving forward with what you're doing, coming from the emergency management perspective. What do you think are the synergies that you bring to the table, and as you're interacting with your clients and in the, the business space? How has that been unique for you, and how do you go about that?
It's been very interesting because I have the lawyer background on top of the emergency management background.
Yeah.
So it's this dual risk management, risk assessment mentality that I have. But I have to say, the emergency management and crisis management tools are the things that really rise to the top. And when I'm working with leaders, what I really strive to do is help them to think like a crisis manager. Because many of us in this field don't realize how we've learned to think and how we've learned to problem solve and compartmentalize and delegate and communicate. And all of these skills are so critical to leaders, both in blue sky and gray sky scenarios.
Yeah.
And so it's really, it all goes back to that empowerment piece of helping people realize what they're capable of, but pulling in those emergency management aspects of the skills I just mentioned, but also in terms of using an after action as a regular tool in your business operations, not just for disasters, right?
Yeah.
So a team finishes a project and they send it off to the client. Okay, so let's start with our after action. What went well? What didn't go well? I mean, you can use it in any scenario, but you're just flexing that muscle so that when you want to do it in a disaster context, it's there, number one. Number two, anytime you reflect on an experience that you've been through, good or bad, you are mining that experience for all of those golden nuggets. And for any organization, any entity, any community that wants to build a more fruitful, more resilient, more successful future, we've got to spend the time pulling out those nuggets to invest them in where we want to go.
I think you hit on two really important pieces, which is, building that muscle memory on the daily, I think is, really important. And then utilizing those skills, those great skills that we learn in emergency management and crisis management. And then, adding that to BAU, to business as usual, to the daily crises that we know are happening in the business, especially in today's environment, so that when those more impactful or larger scale events occur, that they're feeling ready. And that's where they really build, I think, the resilience. So thank you so much for sharing that. I think our audience can take away those pieces into their own practice. So
great.
Thank you.
I hope so.
Hey, too, I wanted to get your thoughts on the last few years. Obviously, with COVID, the COVID response and the pandemic, being kind of the big event over the last few years, but we've also seen multiple natural disasters. We're now looking at the importance of understanding, geopolitical instability, our economic downturn, more cyber attacks occurring on the regular for organizations across the globe. So what are your biggest takeaways from the past few years, and what would you recommend to our audience out there that they should be paying attention to?
Yeah, I would say, the most obvious one is that it's never been more obvious that resilience has a seat at the table, and it should be prioritized on the budget. People who have been in this industry for a long time, especially working with private sector organizations, we know very well that emergency management often gets kicked to the bottom line of the budget. It's something that's easily kicked down the road because often it's thought about as money being spent on a hypothetical.
Right.
It's no longer a hypothetical. Like, how much more evidence do you need to demonstrate the ROI for this type of work? Mm-hmm. Right? It's like, and this is the rub actually for a lot of people when you're talking about measuring the ROI for resilience, because often what you're trying to measure is the absence of failure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so this is why this practice of documenting where you've been and cataloging the experiences you've had is so important to recognize the growth that's actually you're actually accomplishing as an organization or as an individual, quite frankly. Mm-hmm. And that leads me to my second biggest takeaway. And as a former FEMA, I think about this all the time, is that, there has never been more of a reason for people to be focusing on their own readiness and resilience. Mm-hmm. And yes, readiness from the disaster perspective in terms of trying to be prepared for a disaster. But even more so, I think about in the context of like your community and how you can actually be ready together. Yeah. And, I used to live in New York City, so I knew none of my neighbors. So I couldn't fathom a notion like this before. But now I live in Texas and I live on a cul-de-sac. And
different.
My neighbors know I'm an emergency manager. I know my neighbor is a plumber. I know my other neighbor is an electrician. Yeah. And this is what I'm talking about. This is nothing new. If we think about like settlement communities, it was the confluence of the skills across the community that allows it to thrive.
Absolutely.
And that's the type of readiness that we really should be thinking about within our communities. And that's really, I keep saying this word, but it really is what it keeps coming back to, is this empowerment to help people understand, number one, that they're resilient on their own, but that there is power in numbers. And, the more resilient you are in your own capacity, the better equipped you are to help your neighbors who might not be in the same position and might not be as able to become resilient because of whatever, monetary restrictions, ailments, illness, age, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And I remember so vividly going out to do damage assessments during Sandy and seeing these people standing outside leveled homes. Mm-hmm. And there was this talk about like, oh, FEMA's here. Like FEMA's coming. Yeah. And it's like, under no circumstances is FEMA ever going to be the white knight.
Yeah.
That's
they
not
don't make
what they're
whole
made
again.
to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. And with the number of disasters we're seeing and the frequency, guess what? That money isn't going to last forever.
Yeah.
So we've got to start thinking about sustainable, scalable community solutions for resilience.
Yeah. And that's such a great message, really getting back to that community cohesiveness. And, and finding ways. And I'm sure we could do it in New York if we put our mind to it too, right?
Exactly.
But really just getting to know your neighbors, like even on your floor, if you are in an urban setting, trying to find out, or, you could have a building community,
That's right.
disaster group,
Right.
There's no reason that we can't parlay that, right? From the cul-de-sac to the skyscraper.
Exactly.
I know it can be done. That would be great. Man. But yeah, it is so important. And we definitely have to seriously be thinking about those things. I was talking to Todd DeVoe recently, and, he's in the emergency management sphere, and it's that all disasters start local and end local. And that's what we need to really bring back to the public consciousness, because somehow it did seem like you were saying to go away, that it was like, okay, well, the federal government's here and they're going to fix everything. And it's a real letdown when they find out that is not the case, as much as we try to educate people to the contrary. So I love what you're doing, and really, working with your clients and the communities and businesses to get them ready, because that's really where we want to be with resilience, is that old, like can-do-itness on our own. And it's just a reality that we're seeing. Yeah. So, well, hey, I wanted to pick your brain a little bit before we wrapped up today on, that risk assessment part of you, and thinking ahead. What would you recommend to practitioners or to businesses out there over the next few years? What, from your lens, from your viewpoint, are you most concerned about, and would you recommend that people really hone in on?
I mean, from a risk standpoint, there's no question that cyber's got to be moving up the rungs of your risk assessment ladder, pretty much for any organization. But there's also got to start being more awareness on the individual level. I mean, it seems so simple, but it doesn't seem to be getting down to the individual users.
It's a hard nut to crack. Yeah.
Right? Like, I mean, just really basic cyber hygiene. That's something that we could all really work on. And I don't know how it will happen. I do believe it will happen. I think that this is sort of the challenge we face with all personal preparedness messaging. People are really resistant to it until they need it, until it's actually impacted them personally. And so I think that that's the thing that we really need to keep working on, is helping people think about preparedness in that day-to-day life. Like I've talked about with Wired Magazine a few years back, I did an interview with them, and I talked about preparedness as the new self-care. Because if we start thinking about it that way, we build that muscle memory. And it becomes part of our everyday life. And this, by the way, this translates over into every area of your life. If you are somebody who just starts cultivating this readiness mindset, you're thinking 2 or 3 steps down the road about everything that you're thinking about. And you end up better prepared for any adversity. So, that's my pie in the sky vision, is that I can move the needle even this much in terms of how people think about their individual readiness and resilience, and feel empowered to really do things that will help them not just survive terrible disasters and experiences in their life, but actually come through it thriving.
Yeah, that's huge. And, I've been talking about our practitioners, our fellow practitioners out there, as being, Zen masters of resilience. And I feel like that's the level we need to get to. We need to be those guides. We need to walk the walk and talk the talk. And it's hard for all of us. I got to get back to my meditation practice in the morning, speaking of. But I think it's really where we need to be, right? Is we need to encourage others and ourselves to really look at that holistic resilience, to be best prepared. So is there anything else, Katie, that you want to share with the audience today, before we do close out?
I will just share a cool free upcoming thing that I've got cooking. Perfect. It'll come out before the year end. I'm hosting a webinar to teach people how to do their own after actions of the year that's just passed, essentially.
Excellent.
So it's called RevYOU, RevYOU 22.
Thank you.
Because this is one of those synergies, the confluence of emergency management and sort of individual readiness and well-being, teaching people how to ask the right questions about what they've just been through so that they can reflect instead of regret and really make it matter the most possible. You know, take whatever you can from all of the difficulty that we've all lived through. I mean, you can pretty much say to anyone in the world right now, I know you're going through a tough time. It's just like, it just hasn't stopped.
It's a given.
Right? It's like, So, you know, the goal is to offer people, it's totally free. It's just going to be half an hour, just giving you a few key insights on how you can look back in a way that will set you up for a better 2023.
Great.
I will be posting that on LinkedIn. So if anybody just follows me on LinkedIn, they won't miss it there. And it'll be probably coming out in the next few weeks and will be hosted probably middle of November.
Excellent. And hey, make sure to get me that information. I'll share it in the comments below.
Great.
So people can check that out. But how else can people get a hold of you if they want to follow up and learn more?
Absolutely. So my website is www.belficonsulting.com. And all of my contact information is on there. I'm always on LinkedIn and would love to connect. I'm always trying to build my network in this industry because there's anything Hurricane Sandy taught me when I was a newbie attorney, literally looking through my first week Bible, who do I call? It's make friends before you need them.
Yep, exactly. Right. It's you don't want to, it's kind of dated now, but you don't want to be handing out the business card, right?
Yes, exactly.
At the event, you want your relationships built beforehand and you want to know who you're going to be working with. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So important. Well, excellent. Thank you so much for being here today and being a thought leader and innovator in this space. Really glad that we connected, and I know others are going to want to connect with you too. So again, thank you so much. And for our audience, make sure that you like and subscribe. That helps to build the channel, and share. If you like this content, please share it with others so we can spread the word. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ashley.